Well, there's a lot of differences. I think, number one, we all come from different backgrounds. We speak different languages. We have different upbringings. And I think that the sooner you realize the differences that we all have as human beings, the more you have a better ability to communicate cross-culturally. So I think cross-cultural communication, multicultural communication, these are all key ingredients on how a young person can be more engaged in the world. So it doesn't necessarily mean speaking a different language, but it's having the ability to understand how someone from Asia, someone from Europe, someone from Russia, someone from Africa have different ways to communicate the culture. It's not just about how you say it, but it's also about behaving non-verbally. You're using your hands, staring. Sometimes eye contact isn't as prominent in some cultures. So that's the lesson that I get from traveling around the world and talking to different people. Listening is the most important thing. Having the ability to listen and to respond, to not always feel like you have an opinion, but that you are genuinely interested in what they have to say. And sometimes there might be a little bit of a barrier with the language. That's okay, because I've spoken with many people who we have similar interests, but our languages, like I won't speak a very good Russian, for example, or my Russian friend won't have as good a level of English, but we understand each other because we have that connection that sometimes you can't really describe by words. So I don't know, maybe Vanessa might have some experiences.
Yeah, I would actually say that we're all the same. You mentioned the differences, but I think we're all the same. We're all human. We all want the same thing, and sometimes these cultural things, getting to that sameness can be, there can be this static around it of, like you say, like the making eye contact. In one culture it means something, in another culture, this means something. And so you have to understand and be aware of all of these things that are on the outside so that you can get to the core. And one thing that's really helped me is I love art. I love the arts. I love dancing. I love singing. I love music. And I know for other people it's sports, but those are kind of these international, ways of communicating and connecting with people that go beyond just language and get beyond those cultural barriers so that people can connect. For me, it would be in media interviews more than in public speaking. For me, the hardest thing has just been getting people to interact with me and talk. Like in the United States, and there's never a problem in the United States getting the audience to ask a question or getting the audience to participate. But when you go to some other countries, students are very shy, and maybe the culture there is, not to be so, out there aggressively asking questions.
And what do you do to get their attention?
I usually ask them questions, and I also have to then perform. We're going to talk about this just in a few minutes, okay. So we'll talk about this. But I would say sometimes in media interviews, if you don't know, you think one thing is going to happen, and then another thing happens. For example, they'll have live callers call in, asking questions that you didn't expect. That can be difficult. But I think it's just you just need to be flexible, and if you can't answer the question, then do the best that you can. But don't ever try to make an answer up on the fly.
Mm-hmm. And what about you?
I think in the U.S. You see this a lot growing up. It's in classrooms it's okay to ask your teacher, why, or I don't agree, and this is my point of view. In a lot of different cultures, and cultures that I've worked in, that's not okay. So for me, if I'm speaking to a group, I don't mind that people raise their hand and say, well, I disagree, and this is why. And I think that's, as an American, I appreciate the fact that there's a conversation. And even when we don't agree, we at least take the time to share each other's views and respect one another. So for me, the point where I realized that I could be more confident was to understand that I'm not always confident. There are moments where I still am afraid to speak in front of a big group, where it's okay to be nervous. And I think that, you know, we all have, even the best public communicators have an initial fear of speaking, and we go through life having that nervousness, and that's okay. It's not totally doing away with that nervousness, it's learning how to overcome it. Mm-hmm. So I think the big lesson that I would always usually do is be prepared, to know who I'm speaking with, to have my materials prepared in advance, to know that, to anticipate questions and how am I going to answer it, and to engage. So I think that if I talk to a group of students who might want a little bit more of an informal conversation, that's different from doing a lecture, you know, where I'm talking to an older audience, or I'm talking to hundreds of people as opposed to a small group of, say, 10 to 20 people. To know your audience and to be prepared.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say there's not like a moment when all of a sudden you're the confident public speaker. It's like there's something it's a process, and you grow and you get tools, and every time you do it, it's like a practice, and it's not something, I don't think it comes naturally for anybody. I think it's something that you have to practice, and the more you do it, the more you understand yourself and what you need, and like you know that, like I know that I need to have a few minutes to gather my thoughts before I go out and do something, and then you come up with these different tools.
It's also self-awareness, to be aware of whether your audience understands you. So one of the things that the worst public speakers do is not being able to read their audience. So it's if they're speaking but no one is listening. As a speaker, if you haven't picked that up in the first few minutes of your speech, then you will have already failed. So it's about understanding and getting those cues that your audience is listening and engaged. And for me, I draw my energy from an engaged audience, from knowing that my audience is nodding whenever I speak, or shaking their head, or saying, raising their hand, waiting to disagree with me. I think that to me gives me energy, knowing that I'm actually engaging. I think, when people tell me that I'm being very diplomatic, it means I'm being very cautious. So I don't know if that's a good thing or not. I just tend to be very respectful. So if I'm talking about a particular issue, and I realize that there are people in the audience that have different points of view, I want to respect those points of view. And part of my awareness when I speak is not sounding, what we say in English, tone deaf, right? Where you realize that tone deaf, meaning that you don't realize what you're talking about. You're just sort of not taking into account who your audience is and what the message is and whether it's resonating. I think that when you engage with audiences, part of being diplomatic and being skillful is having the ability to talk and respect your listeners' points of view. So that's where I think being diplomatic comes from. And with your family sometimes, or not just with your family, with your friends, where you feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that what you're going to say, you're among friends, and we're, we all are sharing different points of view, and that I might have a point of view that's completely different than Vanessa when we're talking among friends. That's different than when you're talking with strangers, where sometimes you don't know what that person is thinking, so you have to be very respectful with what you say, right?
And I think also most of us who choose this diplomatic path, this diplomatic career, it's because we're fascinated by culture shock and by different cultures. And for me, that carries also into my personal life. It's not only my professional life and my professional life. And listening is really important. It's not only talking, but being able to listen to somebody else. And in my personal life, the same. Like, I have an intercultural family. My husband is from a different country, and so we have, sometimes different cultural things happening at home that I'm like, I don't understand. Okay, let's talk about this, sweetie. And so, but I really enjoy that kind of this learning process that happens when you're in another culture and you're communicating with another culture.
So for me, fake news, it's obvious what fake news is. It's just simply not true. And you have newspapers, media, they all have the ability to communicate en masse to members of the public. And when we talk about fake news, it's fake communication. What you're seeing is not true. In the United States, we have the Bill of Rights. We have actually one amendment to our Constitution that guarantees freedom of speech and freedom of the press. So the journalists in their work can know that when you're in the United States, you have freedom to write about what you want. You could question your authorities, you could question your elders, you can write about things even if it's not flattering for the government. But there's also a responsibility that journalists have in that what they say has to also be the truth. And remember that the mission of the journalist and the media is really for the public good. It's a public service to engage, to inform, and to protect the public rights and to be there as a guarantor of certain freedoms. So, for us, the answer to fake news isn't controlling the news and telling journalists that they have to, report or write certain things. It's having that ability to give media the freedom to report, but also underscoring that they also have a responsibility. And when you have different sources of media, then really that's the best antidote to combating fake news and these sort of, streams of disinformation, for example. Well, part of it is just it's ethical. So as journalists, they go through years of journalism school, for example, where they learn the value of what journalists do, the value of their work. That when they're talking to millions of people through their writing or through their broadcast, what they say matters, words matter. So, and that's particularly important during moments of crisis. So have you ever been through a natural disaster, for example, like an earthquake or a fire, where getting out information to protect the public is important, and media has that responsibility. In fact, I would say that media has that, that partnership with governments to get information out in a timely manner. So during these natural disasters, the public is better informed to have that information to make decisions that will protect their lives and protect the lives of their families. So it's about having that awareness of the responsibility that journalists have when they're using their power to communicate with the public. We don't actively tell them, remember that you're a journalist and that you can't be reporting fake news. It's about that ethical responsibility that journalists have to report.
Maybe if I could just add something onto that. So there are facts, and then there are perspectives around those facts. And it's fine for somebody to have a perspective that's completely disagree. You can have, two media outlets reporting on one event and they're reporting something completely different. But the basic fact of the event or the speech that the person is talking about, or the the building falling down or the fire in this place, it's a fact that happened. And so I think that's really what the heart of fake news. So fake news isn't fake perspective. There's no fake perspective.
Yeah.
Like you can have a wide range of opinions, and that's what freedom of the press is, to report on these wide range of these points of view and perspectives. That's never fake. What's fake is when you misreport those core facts. If you report on an event that didn't happen, or if you report on, you're twisting the words that somebody says and you misorder them, or you take them out of context. That's when it crosses into that border of fake news.